It was a calm afternoon in the heart of the city when things took an unexpected turn that no one saw coming. Marcus Williams, a hard-working father and aspiring entrepreneur, had just finished his shift at the community center, where he volunteered to mentor at-risk teens. Dressed in his usual jeans and a faded hoodie, he was on his way to pick up his daughter from her dance class, his mind occupied with thoughts of her upcoming recital. Little did Marcus know, his life was about to spiral into chaos within moments. Officer Grant, a seasoned but jaded cop, nearing the end of his shift, patrolled the area in his squad car. Known for his sharp instincts, but a temper that sometimes clouded his judgment, Grant was on edge after a long day. His radio buzzed with a report about an assault suspect fleeing the scene just a few blocks away. The suspect was described as a man in his late 30s, wearing dark clothing. The officer's eyes narrowed as he spotted Marcus casually walking down the street. "Stop right there," Officer Grant shouted, stepping out of his vehicle with one hand on his holstered weapon. Marcus froze, unsure if the officer was even talking to him. His heart skipped a beat as he turned to see the officer approaching, his expression a mix of urgency and suspicion. "What's going on?" Marcus asked calmly, but he could feel his pulse quicken. His instincts told him to stay composed, but the intensity in the officer's eyes suggested this was anything but routine. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," Grant said sharply, his voice echoing with authority. Marcus frowned, confused. "Suspect? I haven't done anything. I'm just heading to pick up my daughter." But Grant wasn't listening. In his mind, Marcus's hesitation and calm demeanor were signs of guilt. The officer's voice grew louder, his accusations more pointed, drawing the attention of a small crowd nearby. Marcus tried to explain himself, but every word seemed to fuel the officer's conviction that he'd found his man. The scene escalated quickly. Onlookers pulled out their phones, recording as Marcus, visibly frustrated but still composed, pleaded his case. "Check your facts," he said, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "I'm not who you're looking for." But Officer Grant wasn't interested in reasoning. To him, Marcus's protests only confirmed his suspicions. He moved in closer, ready to cuff him, when an unexpected voice cut through the commotion. "Wait a second," shouted a woman from the crowd. All eyes turned to her as she stepped forward, her phone in hand. "I have proof he's not your guy." The air grew thick with anticipation as the woman began scrolling through her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. Marcus looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes, while Officer Grant hesitated, his confidence faltering for the first time. What happened next would change everything, for Marcus, for the officer, and for everyone watching. The crowd that had gathered seemed to collectively hold its breath. Marcus stood there, his hands still raised slightly in a defensive posture, as the woman scrolled through her phone with an urgency that matched the tension in the air. Officer Grant's gaze darted between her and Marcus, his grip tightening on the cuffs in his hand. For a moment, it seemed like time had slowed, the sounds of the city fading into the background as everyone waited to see what would happen next. "I was just over at the coffee shop down the block," the woman said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "I recorded everything on my phone when the real suspect ran past me." The officer's expression hardened, his pride clearly wrestling with the possibility that he might be wrong. "Let me see that," he demanded, extending a hand toward her phone. The woman hesitated for a moment, wary of handing her device over. "I'll show you," she said firmly, holding it up instead. She pressed play on the video, and a muffled commotion erupted from the small screen. The footage showed a man wearing a black jacket sprinting down the street, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He was clearly not Marcus. His build was slimmer, his height noticeably shorter. Marcus took a deep breath, a mix of relief and frustration washing over him. "See," he said, gesturing toward the video. "I told you I didn't do anything." But Officer Grant didn't lower his guard immediately. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flickered with a stubborn determination. "Stay where you are," he barked, his tone still commanding. He stepped away for a moment, speaking into his radio to confirm the details of the suspect's description. As the officer turned his back, Marcus exhaled sharply, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside him. The woman who had stepped forward gave him an encouraging nod, her expression sympathetic. As the last of the crowd began to disperse, Marcus took a deep breath and started walking again, his steps a little heavier than before. The ordeal wasn't over, not by a long shot, and as he made his way toward the dance studio to pick up his daughter, he couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something much bigger. As Marcus walked away from the scene, his mind was racing. The relief of being let go was overshadowed by a storm of emotions: anger, frustration, and a sense of vulnerability he couldn't shake. The sound of cars honking and distant chatter barely registered as he replayed the incident in his head. He had done nothing wrong, yet for a few agonizing moments, it felt like the world was against him. The memory of the officer's glare lingered. The way Grant had looked at him, like he was guilty before he even spoke, felt heavier than the weight of the stares from the crowd. Marcus clenched his fists as he walked, trying to push the thoughts away. He needed to stay calm, especially with his daughter waiting for him. She didn't need to see her father rattled. As he turned the corner toward the dance studio, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from his friend and colleague Jamal. Asterisk, saw a video of you on social media. You okay? Asterisk. Marcus frowned. He hadn't realized just how much of the incident had been recorded. His face flushed with embarrassment, imagining strangers commenting on his life like it was some kind of spectacle. He typed back quickly. Asterisk. Ken, fine. Just a misunderstanding. Asterisk. But even as he sent it, Marcus knew that wasn't entirely true. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a symptom of something bigger, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. When he reached the studio, his daughter Kayla was already waiting outside, her backpack slung over her shoulder and a bright smile lighting up her face. "Daddy," she called, running toward him. Marcus crouched down and caught her in a hug, the warmth of her embrace melting away some of the tension he'd been carrying. "Hey, baby girl," he said, forcing a smile. "How was class?" "Good," Kayla chirped, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Miss Lena said I've been improving a lot, and I might get a solo at the recital." "That's amazing," Marcus said, his pride genuine despite the heaviness in his chest. He ruffled her hair gently. "I can't wait to see it." As they walked home together, Marcus did his best to focus on Kayla's chatter about dance routines and her friends, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter. He knew he couldn't let it slide. Something had to change. Later that evening, after Kayla was tucked into bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He hesitated for a moment before typing his name into the search bar. Dozens of videos popped up, all variations of the same scene. Marcus standing in the street, Officer Grant accusing him, and the crowd reacting. The captions ranged from supportive, *innocent man, wrongly accused*, to sensational, *Colley's confrontation goes viral*. He clicked on one of the videos, and his stomach tightened as he watched himself on the screen. The comments below were a mix of outrage, support, and ignorance. Some people were furious at the officer's behavior, while others questioned why Marcus had been stopped in the first place. One comment caught his eye. *This happens every day, but most people don't have someone to back them up. Glad that woman recorded it. The words struck a chord with Marcus. He thought about the woman who had stepped forward, about her courage and the impact of her actions. She didn't know him, yet she had risked stepping into a tense situation to stand up for what was right. It was a reminder that even small acts could make a big difference. The next day, Marcus decided to visit the community center, hoping to clear his mind and channel his frustration into something productive. The center was a second home for him, a place where he could give back to the neighborhood and mentor kids who reminded him of himself at their age. Jamal was already there when Marcus arrived, stacking chairs in the main hall. He looked up as Marcus walked in and gave him a knowing look. Man, I saw that video, Jamal said, setting the chairs down. You good? Marcus nodded, though his expression said otherwise. Yeah, I'm good, he said, his tone clipped. Just trying to process it all. Jamal crossed his arms, his face serious. You know this isn't just about you, right? What happened out there is part of a bigger problem. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. I know, Marcus said quietly. But what can I do about it? I mean, yeah, people are talking about it now, but give it a few days, and they move on to the next thing. Maybe, Jamal said, but that doesn't mean you have to stay quiet. You've got a voice, man. People are listening. You could use this to make a real difference. Marcus thought about that as they worked together to set up for the center's after-school program. He had always tried to lead by example, to show the kids that they could rise above their circumstances and make something of themselves. But now he was realizing that setting an example sometimes meant speaking up, even when it was uncomfortable. By the time the kids started arriving, Marcus had made up his mind. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew he couldn't just let this go. Whether it was through a conversation with the officers' department, a community meeting, or simply sharing his story, he was determined to turn this experience into something meaningful. But as Marcus began to take those first steps toward action, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The tension from that day lingered like a shadow, and he had a nagging sense that the road ahead would be anything but easy. As days passed, the incident refused to fade into the background of Marcus's life. The video kept gaining traction online, shared and reshared on social media, sparking heated debates about racial profiling, accountability, and justice. Marcus had hoped to move past it quietly, but the world had other plans. His face was now tied to a larger conversation, one he hadn't asked to be part of but couldn't ignore. At the community center, the kids he mentored began asking questions. Mr. Marcus, is it true you got stopped by the cops? One boy, Trey, asked hesitantly during a tutoring session. His wide eyes betrayed both curiosity and fear. Marcus sighed, setting his pen down. Yeah, it's true, he admitted, his voice steady but thoughtful. But you know what's more important? I didn't let it break me. And neither should you, no matter what life throws your way. Trey nodded, but his silence spoke volumes. Marcus could see the wheels turning in the boy's head, the quiet realization that something like this could happen to him someday. It was a weight Marcus wished he could lift from Trey's young shoulders, but he knew the only way to do that was by confronting the issue head-on. One evening, as Marcus was getting Kayla ready for bed, his phone buzzed with a notification. A local news outlet had picked up the story, and the headline made his stomach tighten. Asterisk. Community volunteer wrongfully accused by police sparks outrage. Asterisk. Marcus clicked on the link reluctantly, his heart pounding as he scrolled through the article. It recounted the events with unsettling accuracy, even quoting some of the bystanders from the scene. But what caught his attention most was the mention of Officer Grant. The report stated that Grant's record included multiple complaints of misconduct, though none had resulted in disciplinary action. The revelation sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He had suspected that the officer's behavior wasn't a one-off, but seeing it confirmed made the situation feel even heavier. If Grant had a history of overstepping his bounds, how many others had been in Marcus's shoes without anyone stepping forward to defend them? Fueled by a mix of frustration and resolve, Marcus decided to attend a community meeting later that week. The gathering, organized by a local activist group, aimed to address the growing concerns about policing in the area. When Marcus walked into the packed auditorium, he immediately felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. People whispered as he passed, their faces a mix of curiosity and encouragement. Jamal was already there, saving a seat for Marcus near the front. "Took you long enough," he said with a smirk, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, well, I had to make sure Kayla was settled," Marcus replied, though his nerves were evident. As the meeting began, various speakers took the stage, sharing their own experiences and frustrations. Some recounted stories eerily similar to Marcus's, while others offered ideas for change, from improved police training to independent oversight committees. When Marcus's name was called, he hesitated for a moment before standing. The room grew silent as he approached the microphone, the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on him. He cleared his throat, gripping the edges of the podium tightly. "I'm not used to speaking in front of crowds like this," he began, his voice steady but low. "But after what happened to me, I couldn't stay silent. What happened that day wasn't just about me, it's about all of us. It's about what kind of community we want to build and whether we're willing to hold people accountable, no matter their badge or title." As Marcus continued, the crowd listened intently, their expressions a mixture of agreement and determination. He spoke about the importance of standing up for what's right, about the courage of the woman who had filmed the encounter, and about the need for real change. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Marcus felt a mix of relief and responsibility. He had taken the first step, but he knew this was far from over. Later that night, as Marcus walked home, his phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. *, keep your head down. Not everyone likes what you're saying. *. Marcus stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. The message was vague, but threatening enough to send a shiver down his spine. He glanced around the empty street, suddenly hyper-aware of his surroundings. For the first time, the weight of his decision to speak out felt like a real danger. When he got home, he double-checked the locks and sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. He didn't know who had sent the message or what it meant, but he knew one thing: backing down wasn't an option. The next morning, as Marcus dropped Kayla off at school, he noticed a patrol car parked across the street. The sight of it made his stomach churn, though he tried to push the thought aside. He couldn't let fear control him. But as he walked back to his car, he noticed something strange. The officer inside the patrol car wasn't looking at the school or the street. He was watching Marcus. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and the officer smirked before looking away. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. He didn't recognize the officer, but the message was clear. Someone was watching him. As the days went on, the tension only grew. Marcus began noticing little things: a car following him a bit too closely, unfamiliar faces lingering near the community center. It was subtle, just enough to make him question if he was imagining it, but the unease was impossible to ignore. Despite the growing pressure, Marcus refused to back down. He continued speaking out, attending meetings, and sharing his story. But with every step forward, the sense of looming danger grew stronger, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And then one night, as Marcus was locking up the community center after an evening session, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, his pulse racing, but the dimly lit street was empty. "Hello," he called, his voice echoing. There was no response, just the faint sound of shuffling feet retreating into the shadows. Marcus stood there for a moment, his heart pounding, before quickly heading to his car. He didn't know who or what was out there, but one thing was clear: the conflict was far from over. As Marcus drove home that night, the eerie silence of the streets seemed to press against him. His eyes darted between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, where shadows stretched long under the dim glow of streetlights. The unsettling feeling from earlier hadn't left him. If anything, it had grown stronger, gnawing at the edges of his composure. He couldn't shake the sense that someone, or something, was closing in. When he finally reached his house, he parked and sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine idle as he tried to calm his racing heart. The message, the patrol car, the footsteps, it all felt too deliberate to be coincidence. He was in the middle of something bigger than himself, and the realization both terrified and strengthened his resolve. As he stepped into the house, the familiar hum of quiet greeted him. Kayla was already asleep, her favorite blanket wrapped tightly around her, and the faint sound of her soft breathing drifted from her room. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her peaceful face. She was the reason he couldn't afford to let fear win. The next day, Marcus's routine continued as usual, but the weight of unease followed him like a shadow. At the community center, Jamal was waiting for him with an odd expression. He held up his phone, the screen displaying an article from a local news site. "Man, you've got to see this," Jamal said, his voice low. Marcus squinted at the headline. Asterisk leaked report reveals internal investigation into Officer Grant's misconduct. Asterisk. Beneath the headline was a photo of Grant, his stern face unmistakable. The article detailed a confidential investigation that had been launched after Marcus's story went public. It mentioned years of complaints against Grant, including excessive force and racial bias. But what caught Marcus' attention most was a single line buried in the text. Asterisk sources close to the department claim the officer may have had ties to a private security firm with a controversial history. Asterisk. Marcus's brow furrowed as he read the sentence again. "What does that even mean?" he asked, looking up at Jamal. "I don't know," Jamal admitted, "but it sounds shady, like really shady." The revelation added a new layer of complexity to the situation. If Grant was connected to something outside the department, it might explain the strange threats and the feeling of being watched. But it also meant the stakes were higher than Marcus had realized. Later that evening, Marcus received a call from an unfamiliar number. He hesitated before answering, his gut telling him it might not be wise. But curiosity won out, and he pressed a phone to his ear. "Hello." "Mr. Carter," a calm, measured voice replied. "We need to talk." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "That's not important right now," the voice continued. "What matters is that you're stepping into dangerous territory. For your sake, and your daughter's, you might want to reconsider your public stance." The mention of Kayla made Marcus's blood run cold. His protective instincts kicked in, and his voice hardened. "Are you threatening my family?" "Not a threat, Mr. Carter," the voice replied smoothly. "A warning. There are forces at play here that you don't understand. It's best to let this matter go." Before Marcus could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. Whoever it was, they knew about Kayla, and that was enough to push him into action. That night, Marcus contacted Lisa, the woman who had recorded the video. They hadn't spoken since the incident, but he knew she was just as invested in the truth coming to light. When he explained the call he'd received, Lisa's response was immediate. "This isn't just about one bad cop," she said, her voice firm. "There's something bigger happening here, and they don't want us to find out what it is. But if we back down now, they win." Her determination reignited Marcus's own resolve. Together, they began piecing together what they could. Lisa had access to online forums and sources that Marcus didn't, and her research uncovered more unsettling connections. The security firm mentioned in the article had been implicated in several high-profile scandals, including cover-ups and illegal surveillance. As the pieces fell into place, Marcus realized the depth of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just about Officer Grant's actions on the street. It was about a system that protected people like him and punished those who spoke out. The tension reached a boiling point when Marcus received another message, this time in the form of an unmarked envelope slipped under his front door. Inside was a single photo. Marcus walking Kayla to school, the image grainy but unmistakable. Beneath it was a note that read, "Last chance." Marcus's hands shook as he held the photo. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just watching, they were closing in. But instead of fear, a new emotion surged through him, defiance. He couldn't let them intimidate him into silence. The next morning, Marcus and Lisa agreed to take their findings to a journalist who had covered similar cases in the past. They knew it was a risk, but it was the only way to ensure the truth came out. As they sat in the journalist's office, recounting everything they had uncovered, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The journalist listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as the story unfolded. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes serious. "This is big," she said. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about a conspiracy that goes way beyond one police department. But before they could discuss their next steps, the journalist's phone buzzed with an alert. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "That's strange," she muttered. "A breaking news story just came out about you, Marcus." Marcus's heart sank as she pulled up the article. The headline read, "Community activist under investigation for alleged misconduct." The text described fabricated accusations against Marcus, painting him as someone untrustworthy and divisive. "They're trying to discredit you," Lisa said, her voice filled with anger. Marcus's jaw tightened. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to silence him, they were trying to destroy his reputation. The stakes had never been higher, and Marcus knew the fight was far from over. The weight of the article's accusations hung heavy in the room. Marcus stared at the screen, a mix of disbelief and anger rising in his chest. He knew this was an attempt to silence him, to make him seem untrustworthy to the people who were beginning to rally behind his story. But he couldn't afford to let them win. Not now. "I'm not backing down," Marcus said, his voice steady. Lisa nodded, her determination matching his. The journalist, after a brief moment of contemplation, "We need solid proof," she said. "Something they can't deny or spin. Do you have any connections who could help?" Marcus thought for a moment before remembering a name. Jordan, an ex-detective who had left the force years ago after speaking out against corruption. Jordan had been a mentor of sorts when Marcus was younger, and though they hadn't spoken in years, he knew Jordan had a reputation for uncovering the truth. Later that night, Marcus called Jordan and explained everything. There was a pause on the other end before Jordan finally spoke. "You've got yourself in the middle of a storm, Marcus," Jordan said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "But if what you're saying is true, then this needs to be exposed. I'll help you." With Jordan's expertise, they began connecting the dots, piecing together a trail that led back to Officer Grant and the shadowy security firm. Jordan uncovered internal memos suggesting that the firm had contracts with local law enforcement to provide specialized services, a euphemism for tactics that bypassed standard protocols. Worse, it seemed Grant was acting as their inside man, leveraging his position to intimidate and silence those who posed a threat to their operations. As they gathered evidence, the threats against Marcus escalated. One night, his car was vandalized, its windows shattered and tires slashed. Another time, he found a note taped to his front door with a single word, "Nerve." Despite the danger, Marcus refused to back down. He, Lisa, and Jordan compiled everything they had into a comprehensive dossier, a damning collection of documents, testimonies, and records that painted a clear picture of corruption and abuse. The final piece came unexpectedly. Jordan managed to retrieve an audio recording from a former officer who had worked closely with Grant. The recording captured a conversation in which Grant bragged about fabricating evidence and using his connections to clean up inconvenient situations. The recording was explosive. It not only implicated Grant, but also tied the security firm directly to illegal activities. With this, they had what they needed to go public. The journalist wasted no time. The next day, the story broke, complete with the dossier and the recording. News outlets picked it up almost immediately, and within hours, the story was trending nationwide. But the celebration was short-lived. That evening, as Marcus prepared to speak at a community rally, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won? Watch your back. Marcus's hands trembled as he showed the message to Lisa and Jordan. They urged him to stay cautious, but Marcus insisted on attending the rally. "People need to hear this," he said. "I can't let them scare me into silence." The rally was packed, the crowd buzzing with energy and anticipation. Marcus took the stage, his heart pounding as he looked out at the sea of faces. He spoke with passion and conviction, recounting his journey and calling for accountability and change. Just as he was finishing, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. Marcus squinted against the bright stage lights, trying to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, a man burst forward, shouting something incomprehensible. Security intercepted him, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of his face. It was Officer Grant. Grant's unexpected appearance sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. As security escorted him away, Marcus realized that the fight wasn't over. Grant's desperation meant he was losing, but it also made him dangerous. The next morning, Marcus received an unexpected call from the police chief. The chief, under intense public pressure, wanted to meet. When Marcus arrived at the station, the chief handed him a folder. "These are internal records," the chief said. "It's everything you need to put the final nail in the coffin." Marcus stared at the folder in disbelief. "Why now?" he asked. The chief sighed. "Because this has gone too far. I can't defend it anymore. And honestly, I don't want to." With the new evidence, the case against Grant and the security firm became airtight. Within weeks, Grant was arrested, and the firm's operations were shut down. The community rallied around Marcus, celebrating his courage and resilience. But just when it seemed like everything was settling, Marcus received one final package. Inside was a single photo of him and Kayla at the community center, along with a note, *, we're still watching. *. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the photo and note. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, but his mind was anything but still. Even with Grant behind bars and the security firm exposed, the lingering threat reminded him that some battles don't end cleanly. He had fought hard to bring the truth to light, but the shadows cast by those who tried to silence him still loomed large. Kayla walked into the room, rubbing her eyes and clutching her blanket. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked softly, her small voice breaking through his thoughts. Marcus forced a smile, folding the photo and note before tucking them into a drawer. "I'm okay, baby girl," he said, pulling her into his lap. "Just thinking about how lucky I am to have you." Her innocence and warmth grounded him in that moment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he had a reason to keep going. In the following weeks, life began to find a rhythm again. The community, inspired by Marcus's story, came together in ways he hadn't seen before. People who had been hesitant to speak out started sharing their own experiences, and the local government announced plans to implement stronger oversight measures for law enforcement. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. Lisa continued to advocate for change, becoming a prominent voice in the movement. She and Marcus often spoke at events together, sharing their journey and encouraging others to demand accountability. The journalist who broke the story followed up with a documentary, highlighting not just the corruption they uncovered, but also the resilience of the community that refused to be silenced. Jordan, the retired detective, quietly stepped back into the shadows, satisfied with the role he had played. Before leaving town, he met Marcus for coffee and offered some parting advice. "Stay vigilant," Jordan said, his tone serious. "You did good, but people like Grant are just one piece of the puzzle. There's always more to uncover." Marcus nodded, his resolve stronger than ever. He thanked Jordan for his help, knowing he couldn't have done it alone. One day, while cleaning out old papers, Marcus stumbled across the original flyer for the community center he'd once volunteered at as a teenager. It reminded him of why he had gotten involved in the first place, to make a difference, to give people a safe space where they could grow and thrive. He decided to refocus his energy on rebuilding the center, turning it into a hub for education and advocacy. With donations pouring in from supporters across the country, the center expanded its programs, offering legal aid workshops, counseling services, and mentorship opportunities. It became a beacon of hope, not just for his neighborhood, but for the city as a whole. The transformation wasn't just physical. The center's new mission reminded Marcus that change often starts small, with people willing to stand up and take risks for what's right. He saw it in the kids who came through the doors, in the parents who volunteered their time, and in the community members who showed up to every event. One afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the center. It was a young man he didn't recognize at first, but the moment the man introduced himself, Marcus's memory clicked. "My name's Anthony," the man said. "I was at that rally when Grant showed up. I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. Seeing you stand up to him, it made me realize I could stand up for myself too." Anthony explained how he had been struggling with fear and self-doubt, unsure if his voice could make a difference. But Marcus's courage had inspired him to file a formal complaint against another officer who had been harassing him for months. Hearing Anthony's story filled Marcus with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a reminder that his fight wasn't just about one man or one case. It was about creating a ripple effect that would empower others to speak out and demand justice. As the months turned into years, the community center became a cornerstone of change. Its walls were filled with photos and stories of people who had overcome adversity, each one a testament to the power of resilience and unity. Though Marcus still received the occasional anonymous message or veiled threat, he refused to let fear control him. He took precautions, of course, extra security at the center, a camera system at home, but he didn't let the shadows dictate his life. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Kayla, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, she turned to him with a question. It was a crisp, sunny morning, the kind of day that makes you feel like anything is possible. The dealership lot gleamed with freshly waxed cars, each one reflecting the vibrant blue sky above. Inside the showroom, the air buzzed with the usual hum of activity, sales associates chatting with customers, phones ringing in the background, and the faint smell of coffee brewing in the break room. It was a normal day for everyone working there, or so they thought. Enter James, a middle-aged man with a sturdy build and a quiet confidence that spoke volumes without him saying a word. He stepped out of his car, adjusted his red "Make America Great Again" hat, and made his way toward the dealership. James wasn't just there to browse or waste time. He had a purpose. His current car had served him well, but it was time for an upgrade, and this dealership had been recommended to him by a close friend. James believed in supporting local businesses, especially those that had a good reputation for customer service. What he didn't expect was the storm brewing inside. As James walked through the glass doors, the showroom fell unusually quiet for a moment. Conversations seemed to pause, eyes subtly darting toward the man in the red hat. It wasn't loud or overt, but James could feel the shift in the room. He was used to it by now. The hat often sparked reactions wherever he went. Most people were polite, but there were always a few who weren't shy about making their opinions known. He brushed it off, as he always did, and approached the front desk with a warm smile. "Good morning," James said. "I'm looking to buy a car. Who can I talk to?" The receptionist, a young woman with a nervous demeanor, glanced at his hat and hesitated before responding. Let me get someone for you. Please have a seat." Her voice wavered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure and disappeared into the back offices. Moments later, a man in his late 30s appeared, sharply dressed in a tailored suit that screamed authority. This was Tom, the dealership manager, a man known for his no-nonsense approach and his tendency to speak his mind, sometimes a little too freely. Tom's eyes immediately zeroed in on James' hat, and his expression tightened. He approached James with a forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning," Tom said, extending a hand. "How can I help you?" James stood and shook his hand firmly. "I'm looking for a new car. Something reliable but with a bit of style. I heard good things about this place." Tom's smile faded slightly as he crossed his arms. "Well, we have plenty of options, but I have to be honest with you. We have certain standards here. We like to maintain a welcoming environment for everyone. I'm not sure that your presence fits with that." James raised an eyebrow, genuinely puzzled. "I'm not sure I understand. I'm just here to buy a car." Tom's gaze flicked back to the hat before locking onto James's eyes. "Look, I'll be frank. That hat, it represents things that some of our staff and customers find offensive. I think it might be best if you take your business elsewhere." For a moment, James was stunned into silence. He'd zero encountered disagreements before, but outright refusal of service. That was a new one. He looked around the showroom, noticing a few employees watching the interaction from a distance, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. The dealership manager might have thought he'd made a bold statement, standing up for what he believed in, but in doing so, he'd unknowingly opened the door to a reckoning he couldn't have foreseen. And as the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting long shadows across the gleaming cars in the lot, the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave everyone involved questioning their assumptions about identity, respect, and the true cost of judgment. James's voice was calm but firm when he finally spoke. "Are you refusing to sell me a car because of my hat?" Tom didn't back down. "I'm saying we have the right to refuse service to anyone who might disrupt our environment. I'm sure there are other dealerships that would be happy to help you." James nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Interesting," he said, his tone almost casual. "Well, I appreciate your honesty." With that, James turned and walked out of the dealership, leaving Tom and the others to assume that was the end of it. What they didn't know, what Tom didn't realize, was that James was no ordinary customer. Beneath the modest exterior and the controversial hat was a man with influence far beyond what anyone in that room could have imagined. As James got into his car and drove away, his mind was already racing. He had a decision to make, and how he chose to handle this would set the tone for what came next. One thing was certain, this wasn't over.